Hey friends, we may have a serial killer working in Oregon State. That's right, lurking about out there. I said we may have because the police are saying, oh, wait a minute, hold your horses. We don't think so, or we're not sure, rather, I should say. But do we really have one out there? I'm going to tell you some of the facts, and I'll let you decide yourself. We're going to talk about that and a whole lot more right here on today's Charlie Crime Buster. What some people are calling, well, they're calling it the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those solely of individuals interviewed and participating in this show and do not represent those of Peacemaker Network and Charlie Crime Buster. All individuals described or mentioned in the podcast should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law. This podcast contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Well, hello and welcome to this edition of Charlie Crime Buster. Well, my friend, is there another unknown active serial killer among us? Well, there are rumblings of so. Some say even evidence. Again, Popo said, hold up, not sure about that. We're going to let you decide today. We're going to be talking about it. You see, there are many that are convinced there is one indeed active serial killer there in Oregon. And there are others who say, well, wait a minute, maybe not. But before we get into that, let me welcome all of our new friends aboard the Crime Train. Thank you for downloading, listening to us every week. New people join us from all over the world. We are delighted to have you. And as always, I'd like to invite, if you're a new listener or you've been those many who just download every week and stay tuned to Charlie Crime Buster, I want to thank you for being a part of it and invite you to reach out with a shout out. You reach me, CharlieCrimeBuster, gmail.com. Charlie Crime Buster, that Crime Buster's one word, at gmail.com. If you'd like to support the program, hey, just head right over there to peacemakernetwork.com. We have a platform there where we help law enforcement, first responders, and the military. You can become a part of it. For little as $3 a month, you become a badge BADGE supporter. You can become a part of all of that at peacemakernetwork.com. We'll put that again in the show notes. Hey, we always try to kick off every episode with a crazy quick story, and boy, we have a doozy for you today. You can't make this thing up. You know, in introducing the story, I got to tell you that as a police officer myself, when I was on the street, I really saw some crazy things out there. In fact, somebody once told me when I first became a cop, they told me, hey, where you are right now, this is a place where you get a front seat on life. And boy, were they right. You get a front seat, all right. All right, here we go. Our crazy crook this week is a female by the name of Elizabeth Johnson. And she was pulled over on a routine traffic stop. But she thought she would gain favorable attention by flashing her boobs at the officer. Yep, it does happen. People do all sorts of things to attempt to get out of a speeding ticket or to keep from being arrested. But this lady, unfortunately, she did not think the whole thing through. First of all, she tried to get out of the car and run to her motel room. She was stopped nearby it. And when ordered to stop, put her hands up, she said, you want to see what I have? And then she proceeded to pull her top and bra up over her head. Only thing was, well, in the process of flashing the cop, well, a crack pipe fell out with drug residue still inside. And by now, you know the rest of the story. She tried to flash the cop, but the next flash she saw was a flash of the camera taking her mugshot as she was booked into the pokey. So my friend, this lady who thought she could get out of trouble with the cops by flashing them and end up seeing the flash of a mugshot camera, she indeed is Charlie Crime Buster's crazy crook of the week. All right, we're getting ready to get into our focus about that serial killer out there in Oregon. But before we do, let me do one other housekeeping chore, something that might help you folks here in Central Florida. Yep, here in Central Florida. You see, now there is an organization called STEMTAC, STEMTAC. They're one of my favorite group of trainers. And they're announcing the next State of Florida Certified 28-hour Class G Armed Security course. By the way, you can read all about this on Facebook under JimLMauney, M-A-U-N-E-Y. It's going to be scheduled for June the 30th through July the 2nd, 2023. And for just an investment of $200, well, you're going to have the entire course of instructions. They're going to teach you about your weapon, how to carry it, how to be safe with it. They're going to give you legal and tort actions, and they're even going to help you get range certified with a 1 caliber handgun. Now, if you'd like more information about this, it's coming up in just a couple of weeks. You can reach out to my good friend JimLMauney at JimLMauney, M-A-U-N-E-Y, at gmail.com. JimLMauney, M-A-U-N-E-Y, gmail.com. And again, to help you out, well, we're going to put that in the show notes. I would encourage you, if you would like to be a part of a great group of people across the country, and particularly here in Florida, that are saying no to crime and helping protect people and property, become a security officer, an armed security officer here in the state of Florida. That's the way you can do it. Very little investment for the money you can make. The best paid security officers are the armed security officers. Well, they need a lot of security everywhere, but particularly it looks like now in the state of Oregon, there might be another serial killer in the mix. Now, I said another serial killer because, my friend, I want you to know that the serial killer we're talking about that might be operating in Oregon, well, unfortunately, that is not the first. In fact, there have been several serial killers in the state of Oregon. They have, in fact, made lists of those serial killers. I want to mention about, let me just give you a summary of some of the serial killers that have operated out there. There was, of course, the I-5 bandit. I-5 bandit, that's because he kind of, he would stalk people up and down the I-5 there in Oregon. His name was Randall Woodfield, and he was linked to a whole bunch of murders in the 1980s and 80s. Now, one thing you may not know about old Randall, he was actually a pro football player. Yep, he was a draft pick for the Green Bay Packers. Didn't stay there long, though. He was let go by the team. Seems he had a long history of exposing himself to women. And then after he was being fired from the sporting team, well, unfortunately then his behavior took a much more disturbing turn. He actually began to prowl up and down I-5. We call that hunting for a serial killer. And as most serial killers, the victims were kind of the same age. Most of his victims are in their teens or 20s. He would force them to perform sex acts at the knife point. Other times he would sodomize them, and then he would kill them with a bullet in the back of their head. Thank God they found him. One investigator who investigated the case thinks he may have killed as many as 45 people. And then there's another guy by the name of Jerry Brutus. Now, he was called the shoe fetish killer. Funny how we give these guys different names, isn't it? He wasn't born in Oregon. He was born in South Dakota, moved to Oregon when he was a child. And even at a young age, he was fascinated with shoes. He would often stalk local girls as a teenager. He would assault them, and he would steal their shoes. But then that behavior escalated, and again in 68, 69, actually, his behavior escalated and made him one of the most disturbing killers in Oregon history. He murdered 4 women. His first victim was a gal by the name of Linda Slauson. She was a saleswoman. He convinced her to come down to his basement. When she was there, he struck her with a plank of wood and strangled her to death. He also cut off her foot, stored it in a freezer, where he would use that to model shoes. And then there were other victims. He got life imprisonment. He died back, not too many years ago, 2006. There's another one by the name of Dayton Leroy Rogers. Now, he was known as the Forest Killer. obviously because he would take his bodies after he would kill them to the forest. Even before his murder spree, as most of these, he had a long history of violent behavior. Even as 19 years of age, Leroy Rogers, well, he stabbed his 15-year-old girlfriend. Get this, on their second date. Boy, you talk about a date from hell. Second date, stabbed her. He went to prison for 4 years. But like some of these guys, unfortunately, he got out of prison and he would continue to attack women. He claimed he had a mental illness. Of course, that helped keep him out of prison, claiming that for some time. But then in 1987, he killed Jennifer Lisa Smith, stabbed her 11 times in the parking lot. And they were alerted to the crime, get this, when her bloody body fell out of his truck as he tried to make a getaway. He actually got the death penalty, but in 2021 that death penalty was overturned for the 5th time, and now Dayton, he's going to be serving his life in prison. Then there is Keith Jesperson. Keith Hunter Jesperson. He's, too, in prison now, serving a life sentence. He murdered a whole string of women. First one, Tanya Bennett, strangled her after a conversation at the bar. But I guess the thing that stands out about this guy, Keith, well, he would taunt police. He would also taunt the media. He would leave notes. He'd even explain who he killed. And on each one of those notes, he marked it with a smiley face. He could have been the real smiley face killer. Heard about that some years ago, the smiley face killer. Well, he was a smiley face killer. The 5th one I'm going to mention to you is a guy by the name of Douglas Franklin Wright. Douglas, too, he again has a large criminal history. Began when he got kicked out of the Marine Corps. He had sexually assaulted a 5-year-old. Then he broke into a lady by the name of Margaret Roseberry, shot the grandmother and her grandchild, Gail Snelling. Then he stole Snelling's 5-year-old son, took that boy to a motel, molested him, and that sparked a manhunt all across Oregon. But the police found him, and they arrested him. All right, now you see what this guy did? You see the violent things that he did? Now get this. Hold on to your hat. He was paroled from prison in 1982. But then when he got out, abducted a 10-year-old child, molested him before killing the boy. That one would go unsolved until Wright confessed. He also committed several armed robberies. My friend, it's disturbing, isn't it? He would find homeless men, offer them work at a remote camp, then drive them into the desert and then shoot them. He killed several people. Then I want to tell you about one more, and then we're going to focus in on our focus today on the possibility of another new serial killer operating in Oregon. Bet you heard about this one I'm going to tell you about. Theodore Ted Bundy. Yep, no serial killer list. Well, you just can't complete it without the infamous Ted Bundy. Interesting enough, though, when we talk about Oregon, he only had one Oregon victim. And she actually, her body did not end up in Oregon, but ended up on Taylor Mountain. That was where most of Ted's Washington victims were laid to rest. The Oregon victim, Roberta Kathleen Parks, an Oregon State University student. It was in 1974 when Kathleen Parks became Bundy's 5th victim. 5 out of 30 across the United States. And as you know, Ted Bundy, he would continue his killing spree for 4 more years. That spree went across the state of California, Colorado, Idaho, Utah, Washington, and even extended down here to Florida, where we nabbed him, arrested him, put him in jail, sent him to prison, and then we killed him with the death penalty. Well, my friend, I want to say, again, I want to make mention of the fact that by telling you about these serial killers that operated in Oregon and telling you about one that may be operating today, I in no way want to disparage the state of Oregon. It is a beautiful, beautiful state. Beautiful mountains. And I got to tell you, a lot of wonderful people that I've heard about that have come from Oregon. It just so happens that because it's so isolated, it becomes a good place for serial killers to lurk and to hide their victims. But now, let's turn our focus to what we were talking about today. And that is that in the midst of these serial killers that have operated in Oregon, it looks like there's a brand new serial killer loose, and he's hunting. It's KGW8 that reported this. They said the bodies of half a dozen women were found within 100 miles of each other on the sides of roads, in the woods, in secluded rural areas, and that was just from February of this year. And there are 5 different law enforcement agencies now are investigating these women's deaths. 3 of them say they're working with others to determine if the cases can be connected and perhaps have a single perpetrator. That was according to officials and a local publication. Now, the most recent case is a 22-year-old young lady by the name of Ashley Rill. She was found dead in a heavily wooded area out there near Eagle Creek on May the 7th. She was last seen way back in March, late in March, at some transit center. You can add to this another woman by the name of Joanna Speaks. She also vanished again in late March. Her body found in a rural area of Clark County on April the 8th. Now, when you look at serial killers, you always try to look at the COD. That means cause of death. And they're not releasing a whole lot about it, but they are releasing it about Joanna Speaks. They're saying publicly she died of a blunt force trauma to the head and neck. That was according to the Clark County Medical Examiner's Office, and they declared her death a homicide. So now you get in the picture? Now, her sister, by the way, she has a sister by the name of Robin Speaks, and even though the police are saying we're not saying for sure publicly that there is a serial killer, well, Robin Speaks, she was really concerned. She said to the news she's concerned about the number of women in the area that's showing up dead. She said, quote, "I don't want to scare people, but the reality is these women are dying in awful numbers." Well, 5 or 6 within months. Yep, I agree. Something fishy going on. There's another lady by the name of Charity Perry. They found her in Answorth State Park, April the 24th. Again, they said they're investigating. Detectives are looking into connections. Now, let me give you the official language from the department there in regards to the death of Charity Perry. They're saying, quote, "As we do of all investigations of this nature, our detectives are following up on every lead in the case, including several tips that are coming in from the public, comments that are being made on social media." That's what the spokesperson of the department there told the Post. He went on to say, "We're working with partner agencies to determine if there are any connections between this case in our county and any others in the region." And then there are more. On April 24th, there was an unidentified Native American woman found near Interstate 205 there in Portland. So now pull your chair up. Let you and I talk a little bit, okay? So what do we have? We have 6 women who have been found dead within a radius of 100 miles. Now you say, well, that's quite a far apart. Not really when you think about it. And if you'll see serial killers, those that have been the very best at evading the police, well, they're usually those that will spread out their victims across other jurisdictions. Remember we talked about Ted Bundy? All those different states? Well, here's a man who's moving all around different counties. If there is a serial killer doing this, he's moving all around these different counties within 100 miles of each other. So there is some sort of pattern there for you and I to look at. But there's other patterns that also fit the possibility of a serial. And that is, take a look at the appearance of the victims. Every one of them has dark hair, except one who had kind of auburn dark hair. They're all within the sort of same age range as well. So here is a serial killer. If he is a serial killer, he likes victims of a certain age, and he likes them of a certain appearance. He likes mostly brunettes. All of them but one were brunette. And the other one that wasn't brunette had dark amber hair. So there's another pattern to look at. I would really be interested in knowing the COD, or cause of death, in the deaths of these other women. Most of the time, lots of times, a serial killer will kill in the same manner. Not always. Sometimes it escalates. Sometimes there's a different MO. Look at Ted Bundy. Look at his MO. His MO would change. You know, at one time, he was just this guy who needed a little help. He'd put a fake cast on his arm, say, "Can you help me open the door? Can you pick up these books?" Blah, blah, blah. And then he hit him across the head, put him in his Volkswagen, and drive off and kill them somewhere and abuse them. But then here in Florida, all those pent-up feelings of rage, man, exploded. Broke into a house, a college campus, on a college campus, and literally just beat women to death. So oftentimes, sometimes it can change. But I would just about say to you that in more probability, the COD, the cause of death in these 6 women, probably is going to be similar. Now, I did hear something, not released from the police department, but I heard something about that cause of death around that neck. Pretty startling. Not going to say it right now because I have not been able to confirm it. But there's a certain signature about these killings that is at least happening in 2 or more of these victims. And that's another thing to look at. So let's look again at what we have. We have 6 women within 100 miles. They're all within the same type of appearance. All had dark brunette hair except one who had amber dark hair. And the bodies are all placed in the same manner. Now, they're not at the exact same spot, but within 100 miles, they're all taken out to the woods. They're taken out into the forest. They're taken out into rural areas. They're disclosed there in areas, remote areas. That seems to be a pattern. To me, it is an MO. It's the way this serial killer operates. And I believe it's really a pattern that they need to be very serious about looking at. So we have all these bodies being placed remotely. They're brunette. I believe that we're going to find in the manner of death, the cause of death, the COD is going to be similar in all of these areas. And so we have different agencies that are now looking. And by the way, it is very smart for a serial killer to move from one jurisdiction to the next. But eventually, these agencies will be talking, they will be communicating. As we know today, they already are communicating. And not only will these agencies be involved, but I believe there's going to be another agency. Probably the tribal police will be brought in too, because one of these was a Native American woman who was found near Interstate 205. So you're probably even going to have the tribal police all working together. What is it going to take for them to realize they have a serial killer on their hands? One thing that would prove it is DNA. I mean, in all these 6 killings, it's quite possible that the killer has left some DNA. And if they can get that DNA and match it to one or more of the killings, they'll know at least the same person is connected to one or more of those killings. That's a good way to connect it. Cause of death is another way to connect it. So what would you do if you wanted to catch this guy out there? Well, one thing you'd want to do is you'd want to focus in on 2 things. You want to focus in on where that person was last seen. One of them, I told you, was at a transit place where there was a lot of people coming and going. Probably like a bus stop, something like that. You go back to the place where the victim was last seen, and you try to see that in all those situations was the same suspicious vehicle found. In all those situations was the same suspicious person found. In all of those situations was the same person found in one or more of those places. That's a good way to get zeroed in on that particular killer. Another way is to go to where the bodies are found. Even though they're in a remote area, you got to get there from somewhere, right? And we know that he didn't walk around with bodies over his shoulders, so there had to be some means of transportation. Here we go, right? You're following me, aren't you? So you start checking cameras out from these areas. Now, I know it's in the remote areas, but there are cameras today everywhere. So you get to that remote area where the body was found, and then you work your way back, and you find cameras on roadways, paths, getting into that area where the body was found. And you look for the identical vehicle to be found. Remember what happened in Kohlberger with the Idaho College student murders? How did they really latch onto him? You remember, don't you? Yep, a white car, a Lantra. They were looking for the same car. They were looking for that white car. That connected them to Kohlberger. And in turn, that brought to the arrest of Kohlberger all the way out in Pennsylvania when he was back at his parents' house. Same thing can happen here. They can find a vehicle going in and out of those areas, connect that vehicle a person, then we might match on to this possible serial killer. All right, there you have it. These ladies all murdered within 100 miles of each other, all have brunette hair, all are placed in a remote area as far as the burial grounds, staged and placed that way. Lots of things we don't know about the case yet, but I bet there's a lot more similarities than we realize. But what do you think? Is there a serial killer loose and working in Oregon? Should the authorities put the full court press on this? Get a task force going? Maybe even alert the public? Well, I'll let you decide. I just shared with you some facts. Be interested to know what you think. You can reach me again, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Would love to know what you think. Do we have another serial killer to add to that list of infamous serial killers in Oregon? And once more, you dear folks in Oregon, I'm not trying to talk down your state. You have a beautiful state, rolling hills, gorgeous landscape, and wonderful people. It's such a shame that in the midst of such beauty, in the midst of wonderful people, we have such evil, vile people as the person or persons that are responsible for the death of these 6 women. So this is Charlie Crimebuster. We're going to tell you more about this killer. We're probably going to stay on the hunt. This looks like a case we need to really zero in on and see if we can't get this guy caught or a person's caught before they kill more people. You can help us do that. Pass the word around. Share this episode. Talk about it on Facebook. Get the word out there. There's somebody killing people in Oregon, and we need to stop him, her, or them from their terrible, terrible deeds. So till this time next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster reminding you, stay safe, stay alert. Yep, for the life you save, it may be your very own